Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second noontime talk. We have with us Vinayak Bharne, who's going to talk about vibrant places. What are the components of vibrant places? What makes Montebello accessible? What makes people come into Montebello? And when they come, what is the image? Is Montebello sociable? In that, is that a drive-through experience, or is the urban fabric encouraging people to get off park and park? I think everybody is muted. So it's we again have the good fortune to have Vinayak Bharne. Vinayak is a senior principal with the firm Moore & Polozoy, and he's helping us lead the visioning workshop for the next 3 days. Vinayak and Moore & Polozoy have not only studied the components of what makes urban places and vibrant, but have also contributed in giving rise to many vibrant urban places here in Southern California, as well as throughout the country and throughout the world. Vinayak is also a thought leader. He's written a number of books, and he has another book coming out on that's going to talk about post-pandemic urbanism. So he will be, he's the right person to have before us this evening to help share his thoughts on vibrant places and how and what adjustments we need to make as we come out of the pandemic. With that, I'll hand it over to Vinayak to make the presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Okay, hang on. Okay, thank you, everyone. Can you all hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay, good.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do is take you through some criteria as an extension of what some of the things we talked about yesterday evening on the ingredients of great places. And then I will show you some projects that provide empirical evidence on how the science of placemaking is not a theory, but really a praxis-oriented science that can really yield enormously lucrative results socially, economically, and otherwise. You know, the word places has been around for some time now, but it's not an abstract term because over the last 20, 30, or 40 years, there has been enough transformation that has happened in our cities that the term places and placemaking has now become a science in its own right. Sociologists, cultural theorists, architects, urbanists, economists, all have come together to understand various parameters that work and don't work. One of the reasons this is important is because the kind of urbanism that we have practiced over the last 50 years, you know, particularly after 1945, 1947, all the way through the 60s, was an urbanism that really favored the car over anything else. And as a result, before we knew it inadvertently, pedestrians became footnotes. And our cities began to get inundated by cars. We created what is called sprawl. I want you to understand the gravity of what I'm talking about, because in one of the most regulated nations in the world, in our country, sprawl is a legal phenomenon. It was not an accident, right? I mean, everything that you see, the wide roads, the massive asphalt heat islands, everything that was done, the freeways slashing through your neighborhoods, the placelessness, as we call it, was not an accident. It didn't happen accidentally. It was done through policy. And probably the way policy was written or probably not written and enabled this to happen. So it is against this backdrop that we now talk about criteria to revive the enduring qualities of places that we did not focus on over the last few decades. And these enduring qualities come from many of the places that we look at before this Euclidean planning came and took over our cities. We're talking about traditional places, the pedestrians mattered, they were much more sustainable, they're much more ecological. What exactly were some of the qualities of these places that we find so enduring, and how do they apply today to our cities? So the first one, I have 30 points to share with you very quickly, and then I'd love to open this up for questions, and then I'll show you some projects. So the first one is, when you think of any place, it has to be for everyone. The greatest places in the world, whether you're talking of the St. Mark's Piazza in Venice, or whether you're talking of a square or a plaza or anything, a park, this is a place where you cannot have a demographic of choice. The first idea of a place is that it is truly all-embracing and inclusive. So I'm showing you the slide because before we get into the social aspects of places, the first thing we need to recognize is the democratic social aspects of places that embrace inclusiveness in every sense. The second one, which is an extension of what I just said, is they should be easily accessible to everyone. So again, we're not talking of demographics only in terms of income levels, for example. We're talking of demographics in terms of age. I mean, is this place easily accessible to everybody in a city? Is its location, its physical character, its details, are they thoughtfully done enough that people of different income groups, different ages, different cultural backgrounds, different interests come and enjoy and actually have the same rights to this place? That's really as much an issue of social justice as it is about physical design. Number three, places can become regional destinations. In other words, there are places that are locally memorable, but locally memorable places can also become regionally memorable. This is one of the great ways cities transform themselves. If you invest in great placemaking, I will show you some examples of this, all of a sudden, although it brings enormous economic renaissance into your city, all of a sudden it becomes a destination because the neighboring cities now want to also come and enjoy this wonderful place. So the revival of streets, the upgradation of plazas, the reprogramming, revitalization of these places through 24/7 programs is all a way of creating memorable destinations that can raise the prosperity index and the social index of your city. The fourth one is that it has to be rooted to the realities of your city, right? You are Montebello. You have a culture of your own. Somebody told us yesterday, Montebello is the city of flowers. So what a wonderful thing to have. What a lovely label to carry. I mean, what's better than being a city of flowers, right? I mean, so how do you leverage this branding? What does it mean? What kind of places do you create? How do you make something that's uniquely your own, that is rooted in your history, your reality, yet compatible with the absolute realities of today, that it accommodates cars, gives them their right place, accommodates parking, puts the pedestrian first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this point is really at the heart of everything we're going to be talking about over the next few days, where the social identity is both your own and the places we create, the places we propose should be unique to Montebello so that they don't become formulaic places that are what we call anywhere places. The fifth one is that great places are great mediations between preservation and new development. I have never seen a place where beautiful old buildings are hundreds of years old that were built of real materials were taken away and replaced with new development altogether. I mean, that's not a sustainable way of placemaking. Placemaking is about recognizing your history, taking the beautiful buildings that you have, taking the beautiful memories you have with these buildings, taking the spaces between the buildings that you have, preserving them, retaining them, and then incrementally proposing new development. And the golden word here, of course, is compatibility. And how do you bring compatibility between the character you have in a place and the character you're going to bring in a place? So we're talking about building heights, building types, building density, the regulations that will govern buildings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the issue of how to keep what is good about a place, what not to touch that is good about a place, is as important as bringing in new development within a place. The sixth one is the size of a place. We now know through empirical evidence in human behavior studies, particularly in the world of urban planning, that pedestrians, for example, walk, an average American walks comfortably 5 minutes. Typically after 5 minutes, studies show that they may or may not. Now, what this means is that if you're really trying to create a destination place where you want pedestrians to really prioritize themselves, you cannot afford to make it too big, because if it's too big, they're going to sit in their car. So a classic example of this is the traditional American Main Street. You know, all our cities in the US had wonderful main streets until Euclidean planning took them away. Now, if you look at a traditional Main Street, the fundamental science of a Main Street was it was about 1,400 to 1,500 feet long, because a quarter-mile radius shed, a 5-minute walk, a 5-minute distance is about 1,400 feet. So if you take a circle with a 1,400 or 1,320 foot radius, the beautiful thing about this is you now can straddle this entire street and experience this entire street purely by walking. And it's interesting if you observe main streets. For example, in Los Angeles, I mean, a great example is, we take something as famous as 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, a street that was close to traffic. Has become a regional destination now. If you look at the length of that street, it's actually 3 blocks long, and it's about 1,400 to 1,500 feet. And if you really look at what goes on every day, by the time you go from one end to the other, there's a good chance that you're not going to go more than that. People don't even straddle past 3/4 of the second block. So this is a science that remains true to this day. And it's only to say that it gives you a physical parameter to gauge the size of places that you're trying to create. The next one is about creating destination parking. This is important because, as I mentioned yesterday evening, there are 2 kinds of placemaking strategies in the current realities of our world. We all use cars, which means that parking becomes important. But I don't have to tell you how many places in our country have been destroyed because parking has taken over acres and acres of land and left nothing to make street faces, etc. So some of them are progressive ways of thinking, of giving parking its place in the city, is what we call park once, pedestrian first, which means that, like it has been done in places like Santa Barbara, Pasadena, etc., you look at an area in your city, an urban core, you identify pockets that are either surface parking lots or areas that could have large swaths of land that are, close to the main street, but not facing the main street. You consolidate them as concentrated parking places. You take your streets and recalibrate them to make parking on both sides of the street. Sometimes the parking could be angled, sometimes the parking could be parallel. So in other words, between the parking on the streets and between the parking in these concentrated lots or structures over time, as your city becomes denser, but not certainly in the initial phases, you can create pockets that are so proximate to the central street, for example, that you can park there and you can walk into the downtown, walk into the place and experience it purely as a pedestrian. Now, one of the first cities to implement this in the region was Pasadena. And I remember having a conversation with one of the community development directors recently. And I asked her, how did you convince people at that time in the early 80s that this was a good idea along Colorado Boulevard? And she said, oh, it was very simple. She said, what we did is we told the people, told the citizens, when you go to a suburban mall, you basically do the same thing, don't you? You basically go into a gigantic parking lot. You find a car, you find a spot to park your car. And then you park your car and you get out of there and you walk into this air-conditioned mall. And once you're in the mall, you walk everywhere in the mall. You're doing the same thing in this area in your city. The only difference is in a mall, you park once, you walk across a not so nice parking lot, and then you go into an indoor mall. What we're telling you to do here is do the same thing. You park in one spot, except instead of walking through a crazy parking lot, you are now walking along a beautiful street. And you walk along a side street and you come into another mall, which is an outdoor mall, which is the heart of your main street. You're doing the same kind of behavior, you're walking the same, but the context has now changed because you now have fresh air to breathe, you now have real stores, real sidewalks, etc., etc. And as you know, Pasadena was one of the first cities to implement this idea of park once. So the point is the same. It's not that you need parking garages or anything. You can do this with parking lots. The principle is that you don't let parking dominate your urban core or a place. You don't let you give parking its subservient place, which is in locations that are proximate to the heart of the project, from where you can park once and walk into the project as a pedestrian. And just to go further, so some empirical evidence here. What we've discovered through 20 years of practice or 30 years of practice is, if you don't do this, your parking ratios in a downtown, say take a downtown area, a parking ratios in your downtown area, can become 5 cars per thousand. And we know now that through empirical evidence and studies that at any single point, these parking lots are not used 100%. So you have half of your parking lots left completely empty and unused at any point in time. But if you make consolidated parking like this, as other cities have done, the cumulative parking ratio, say you have 1 million square feet of retail in your commercial in your downtown, and now you want to park it. If you have these places which are used almost 95 to 100% all the time, you can bring the cumulative parking ratio down to 3 or 2 cars per thousand. So the mathematics is very interesting, that rather than, there are many sciences, and our traffic consultant will present tomorrow and you can talk more about this, but the way we craft parking in a place has crucial impact on the kind of legacy that place creates over time. The sixth one is, places are meant for 24/7 use. They are not meant for the greatest places in the world. The great urban design, the great planning, the science of great placemaking is about making places that adapt over time through day and night. They can take different uses. The night activity creates an atmosphere that's completely different. In the daytime, it changes, et cetera, et cetera. This has enormous implications in the way you design streets, or the way you design sidewalks, on the way the sidewalks can be used. They can become malleable. This is something that has particularly become important in the COVID situation. I'm writing about this in my book as well. What COVID did is it turned the city inside out, basically, because we couldn't sit indoors. The activity had to spill outside. So immediately we began to realize that the space between our buildings, whether it was the sidewalk, the parked car that we took for granted, et cetera, were now potent places to rethink how activity could be recalibrated and how innovative we've all become, right? I mean, to take parking spots away and make seating arrangements there. I mean, these are wonderful things that have happened all over the country that prove to us that there are many other ways of thinking of the open to sky spaces between our building as great places that could lend various uses over time. But places change. Places are not static. So the greatest places in the world are those that allow almost like an almanac of sorts to happen season to season, day to day, week to week. If you think you have a street or a plaza that looks like one thing, it could completely change its texture through human activity over time. How this is calibrated, how you allow this to happen, how easily the design allows this to happen, is what the science of placemaking in the physical sense is also all about. So flexibility is at the heart of great placemaking. Safety and security in great numbers. And the best way of making places safe is not through barricades. That is, of course, important. But what is truly the most sophisticated way of keeping a place safe is to bring as many eyes onto a place. So whether it is a riverfront, whether it is a plaza, whether it's a street, what you want to do is not be afraid of bringing development that is so compatible, so friendly to that place, that there are windows and doors looking out into that place constantly, so that there's just eyes looking into that place, offering it a semblance of security that can be second to none. So we call it eyes on the street. And this means that it has implications on the regulation, architecture, the rules that will be written. For example, you could write a rule that says a building should have a 10-foot setback and it should not be more than 2 stories tall, and it should have parking at 2 cars per unit. Sounds like a very noble regulation. But in the hands of a terrible architect, you can have a blank wall on that street, and that blank wall can be 100% legal because your rules did not tell that architect that he should not have a blank wall. So we have learned the hard way, I should say, that our rules have told people what to do, but they have not told people what they should not do. So one of the things we now do in the rules we write to enable compatible development and friendly development is we tell people what to do. You need a 10-foot setback, you need roof, you need 2 stories, but we also write rules that tell them what they cannot do. We mandate that ground floors have to be activated. We mandate that they have to have frontage conditions that look down into the street. This is a mandate. We don't tell them how they should do it. They could be of various styles. We leave many things open-ended, but there are some things that are mandated to make sure that there is a predictability in the way we create buildings that embrace the idea of eyes on the street. That is the crucial point here. The next one is about the relationship of parking to, say, retail, which is such an important place, plays such an important role in some of our places. And there are many kinds of retail. Of course, one kind of retail is a gigantic anchor where you have parking lot, etc. But the other one, which often, sort of becomes the most beloved sort of local market is people who've lived for multiple generations in the same place and nurtured shops and bakeries and all kinds of things that create wonderful memories and histories in your city. And we've realized that parking in front of a retail shop is very important. There are a number of advantages of this, but the most important advantage for the shop is an economical one. There is now empirical evidence to suggest, numerous studies to suggest, that if you have a parked car, if there is parallel parking or angled parking right in front of your street, could be 15 minutes, could be half an hour, could be 1 hour, could be the whole day. The average profit that a shop makes is at least $100,000 more at an average because of the convenience a customer has to parking there. I mean, this is a very important point because if you think of something as simple as a laundry, say you want to go and get your clothes out from a laundry. I very much doubt if many of us would like to park in a structure or a parking lot 2 blocks away, walk to the laundry, come back, take a bunch of hangers, walk back to the car. So sometimes 15 minutes of convenient parking in front of a shop makes all the difference in the world. So there are ways of thinking of convenience and subtle aspects of placemaking that we cannot take for granted. Park once, I spoke about this, but I want to talk about it in terms of form. While we talk about parking lots, and over time, as a place densifies, it could become parking garages as well. But we don't have to treat these like second class and third class spaces. This is a great example. Just as an example, this may not be literally applicable to your city, but I'm showing you the principle. This is in Santa Barbara, and you can see that this is a parking structure. This is a massive parking structure in downtown Santa Barbara that becomes one of the most important garages as you walk into the downtown. I'm showing you the aerial view of this because this is the only view that allows you to know that it's a parking structure. If you look at how it's designed from the street, if you look at all the sidewalks around it, note that it is completely surrounded by buildings. This is what we call liners. These are lined buildings that conceal the face, the utilitarian face of the parking garage. And so when you walk on the street, you have no idea it's a parking garage except for signage that tells you can go in and park here. This is where design becomes so important. This is why design matters. So one of the things we are going to do as we take this plan forward is to write regulations that make sure that whether you're talking of a parking lot, parking structure, anything to do with parking, there are rules in place that allow a kind of qualitative aspect to the public realm that deny a kind of utilitarian leftover aspect that can destroy places. The sixth one is, number 14, is wayfinding. This is very important because in a complex series of places where you have a downtown, you have another place, you have a third destination, a series of neighborhoods, it can sometimes be very disorienting, perhaps particularly for a visitor that comes in. So signage becomes important. And we've often said that, while the region is the largest urban unit that you can study, at least I say this, the street sign is the smallest one that deserves attention. Because if you create the wrong street signs, you could destroy a place. You can make it so combobulated visually that it can be a mess. So we should never underestimate good navigation, important navigation. And navigation is not just about signage, it's also about landscape and design. Uh, for instance, if you have a grid of streets, just the way in which you plant trees on these streets, different trees, for example. I mean, there are so many cities in the world where north-south streets are different from east-west streets. They're planted differently. There are other beautiful places where the most important street has flowering trees and the rest don't. So there are ways of orienting you in a complex place by simply using landscape along with signage that makes your life a lot easier as you navigate it. Cars should always be behind buildings, not in front of them. So this is the classic critique of the strip mall. We're not saying that there are two ways of looking at a strip mall. One is as an economic engine, and nobody's questioning the idea of a strip mall as an economic engine. I mean, strip malls give us so much, they contribute so much to our economy. That's a wonderful thing. But the form of the strip mall has destroyed walkability on our streets. That's a fact. And we should not be condoning that. In other words, what has happened in the strip mall is because of regulation, you park from the street, you have no street face, and then you have an L-shaped building or a C-shaped building that allows itself to go in, and the only face of that strip mall is within a parking lot. If you reverse it, you can get now a perfect street face, and the parking lot goes behind. So there are now amazing transformations of places that are going on where the economic vitality of these places is not compromised. The people who are there are still there. The shops that are there are still there. But the form of the place has been reversed to make sure that you're not just talking of one building at a time or one strip mall at a time. You're talking of together making the face of a street, because that street is the public realm that every single stakeholder, every single business owner, every single resident can now stake a claim and say, this is my public realm. I live on this street. I have a shop on this street. And if you make that street beautiful in terms of design, which I will show you some of them, there is such a sense of pride in being on these streets that it not only raises your destination value, it can also raise land values. It can also become memorable places. These become destinations in no time. In order to make such places like streets, the most interesting thing to do is to not make them wide. Or another way of saying it is make them as narrow as possible. Now, you cannot have every street narrow in a city. Some streets need to carry traffic. There's no question about it. But even those that carry traffic have to be designed in a way that pedestrians should be able to cross from one side to the other easily without much threat. When it comes to retail streets, the most successful retail streets are those whose proportions are designed in such a way that as you're walking along the sidewalk on one side and you look to the other side, you can read the signage on the other side of the street. This is the best advertisement any shop could make. If your street becomes wider and you cannot see what's on the other side, the appeal of the retail on the other side goes away. So the most successful retail environments are those that keep the street compact enough that you really create an advertisement on both sides, and the sidewalks are friendly, and the curbs are friendly, and the crossings are friendly, so you can seamlessly go from one side to the other. We need clear sights of clear vision lines. This is an example of a very nice sidewalk. I mean, it's wide, there's nothing over the top about this, but you can see it's just a modest sidewalk. This is about 15 feet wide. Along the edge, along the curb, you have parallel parking, you have all the street furniture and the meters. And then you sometimes have easements where the buildings are set back so that the 15-foot right of way that's owned by the municipality, it becomes even bigger and becomes 20 feet because each shop gives it a hardscape of 5 feet, where you can have a license agreement where people can actually sit out and enjoy themselves with canopies, etc. So how we design streets, how we regulate setbacks to make sure that narrow sidewalks become wider, etc., are sciences that are now pretty prevalent and that we're going to use over the next few days in your city as well. A highly choreographed shopping presentation. When it comes to shopping destinations, we've learned, any retail expert will tell you that the more diversity you bring in terms of how you advertise, what kind of environments you create, the more richer a place gets. This is a classic case where you see a subway stop right there. This piece you see to the left is an entrance that takes you down into the subway. And you emerge into this sidewalk, and right there, are retail shops with a wide sidewalk that take you straight through. So how you situate retail, how you choreograph retail around important nodes where people are going to emerge and erupt is a great way of creating vibrant places. Retail that addresses various consumer demographics. I don't have to say this. This is an extension of the first point I made. The richness of a place emerges from diversity of all kinds, whether it is through architectural expression, whether it is through, cultural appropriation, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that is important here to bring up is, while we can regulate very intelligently a lot of things, regulations also have a way of making things less predictable. If you regulate everything, the sort of spontaneous element of your city is gone. So one of the secrets of good regulation is to regulate what we need to make sure that street faces are being made, sidewalks are being respected, signage is in the correct place, parking is in the correct place, but also leaving some things open-ended so people can actually express themselves in their city, own the city, take it over, and really make something that's very much their own. One thing that's very important to note is our cities are in constant flux. I mentioned this point yesterday in my introduction line. Our cities are in constant processes of upgradation because things are constantly changing. Technology is changing. Our tastes are changing. So places and buildings change over time. And this is something that we need to respect as well. So what was once a train station could now become the most famous market in your city. What was once, an office building could become a market. So we must keep an eye on these wonderful opportunities, whether they are industrial buildings, whether they are, retail buildings, commercial buildings. They may be one thing today, but visioning them in the long term can create places of unique character and quality that you may not have today, and that can be unique to your city and therefore regionally unique as well. One very important thing is corner conditions in cities. The most valuable places in cities are the junctions. So here you see, an intersection where the yellow building is a corner. And these are extremely important destination places, whether they are offices, whether they are retail. So one of the things to point out is the design of intersections, even if the rest of the street may not be filled, etc. We must try our best to make the intersections as interesting as possible so that they mark important moments in the city and announce the quality that is to come. So another way of saying it is, when you make a place, if you're doing a first phase of a streetscape improvement, one of the places to start building buildings, if you want, is at an intersection. If you can take 4 corners of an intersection, if it's available, and really design some 4 handsome buildings that mark a corner, that's an amazing thing, because the moment you stand in that intersection, you feel like you're in a new place. If the same 4 buildings were at 4 different ends of the street, you wouldn't even sense a place. The place would look the same. But the moment you bring them together, you now create a kind of a place. So, when 2 buildings sit next to each other, we often call it architecture. When 2 buildings face each other, we often call it urbanism, because now the 2 buildings don't just have to make themselves, they also have to make the space that is between them. It's as simple as that. So places are mixed use, retail, entertainment, residential activity, creates buildings of various types. Housing particularly becomes a very important aspect of the fabric because, great places attract people not just to work in them, but live on them. So what happens is, depending on the kind of streets you have, a narrow street, a wide street, a very wide street, a boulevard, the wider the street, the taller the buildings it could take. It could, not that it should, but it could. If you have a street that is only, say, 40 feet wide or 50 feet wide, if you start putting 5-story buildings on top of it, you're going to get no sunlight in the street. But if you have a street that's 100 feet wide, you could easily put 3- and 4-story buildings and still be a charming street. So the only point to make here is, while all these slides are about housing, there is something called typology in housing, which we'll talk about on the last day, which is there is a gradient of densities that come with housing form. For example, to the top left are house scale housing projects that are duplexes, quadruplexes, triplexes. These are very good on streets right next to single family neighborhoods because they don't destroy the character of the single family neighborhoods. They allow density to come in on streets, but they're still at the scale of a single family house. If you look at row houses, it's very similar. But if you come to the bottom and you look at the stacked flats or the one to the bottom right, which is flats over retail and commercial, these are clearly buildings that immediately say downtown, right? I mean, these are the kind of buildings you want in a downtown. You don't want single family scale buildings in the downtown. So how you create housing in different parts of the city is different because you don't want the city to look the same everywhere. The great joy of creating cities is diversity. The more diverse you make your city, diverse set of places, all of which are so memorable that you can go to a downtown, you can go to a neighborhood, you can go to another district, and they're all different. They're all beautiful, they're all wonderful, but they're different. That's the greatest privilege you can have. So design is very important here because it's the same thing, it's housing, but how you regulate housing, how tall the building should be, what kind of walls it should have, what should happen at its ground floor, what the setback should be. All of these have enormous influence on the character of a place. Employment and housing mixed together is one of the most wonderful things we can do. It's a sustainable thing because we don't have to drive necessarily. So proximate diversified employment uses along with housing are wonderful things to think of. We typically call this mixed use, but it's a term that is broad enough that now we can think of it in various ways. So how you bring housing and office together and what forms you create and how you accommodate the parking for that, how you locate them along transit nodes is all part of this great science. We can never underestimate the importance of public art. Public art is one of the most transformative agents in cities. One of the great things is it also gives enormous employment to so many artists in your city. So, I mean, I have seen so many wonderful projects in cities that have been done by local artists that are incredibly transformative. And we should be talking about this because it's not just an urban design strategy, it's also an economic development strategy because it generates an employment base, et cetera, et cetera. The maintenance of your city is very important. Now, this is crucial because when you think about something as simple as landscape, landscape in theory is one thing, but landscape as a pragmatic idea is another, because we cannot create landscapes that are so difficult to maintain that in 5 years, you're all fed up and saying, my God, this created more trouble for us. So this is a very important aspect to talk about, the kind of trees we choose. The kind of planting we create, how frequent that planting is, et cetera, et cetera. All of this has to be gauged within the realities and the preferences that the city has to create these kind of places. Service uses can never be underestimated in the city. This is very important. While we talk about beautiful streets and wonderful places, at the end of the day, every place has garbage. It needs to be collected. There are so many places that need loading every morning. Retail places need supplies. How do you accommodate these without destroying a place? How do you create these places which are absolutely imperative, without which the place cannot function, but you don't make them gaping holes in a building, right? So the science of creating stealthy dealing service in places is a very important aspect of great placemaking. We often don't talk about this enough, but any great place that you like it because the service users have been handled with such intelligence that you never even see them. That's the genius of great placemaking. And then, of course, a great place needs to be branded and marketed beautifully. If you make great destinations in your cities, they inevitably will become great places that will attract people, but their branding is of the heart. So how you do that, what you can do in terms of public art to enhance this kind of branding, how you keep the branding updated, what kind of impressions you create to the rest of the world. As if people are driving along a freeway and they look at a sign called Montebello, and what does it say? What is it telling them? All of these things are the first impressions you make to the world, and you should not underestimate them. Climate, I don't have to talk about this, but it's an important factor. You know, we're blessed in Southern California to have a perennially benign climate. What exactly does this mean? And how can we take advantage of it? What does it mean to be outdoors? What is the great privilege of living in a region that has, you know, sunlight most of the year? What kind of places can we create? I think this is the question that we're really trying to ask. Um, Public and private investment. Many times, some of the great places are created as public-private partnerships. You know, sometimes cities find it very difficult to create public spaces with enormous investments everywhere in the city. But there are so many examples now in our own region where the municipality and private developers, for example, have come together and created wonderful places. So public-private investments and cooperation can result in a lot of things that one entity cannot do alone. And this is something we should be talking about more and more as we get into the implementation strategies of this project. So I would love to show you some projects here, but if we can take a 2-minute pause and take any questions on some of the things I've talked about, that would be a good thing to do right now.
If you have any questions, we encourage you to either raise your hand or put it in the chat box.
Well, or comments would be fine too. You don't have to have questions. You can just ask comments or just, you know, or things you agree with or things you absolutely disagree with. I see Brisa.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for going over these different descriptions for us. So I know you've been talking a lot about, you know, the different spaces, and yesterday's conversation was more about the demographics and breaking down areas. I hear a lot about parking from you, so I'm just curious if you have something similar to yesterday's presentation where there was like a breakdown of areas where perhaps it's highly suggested where more of those parking structures would be at, or is there a recommendation that, you know, we could look at and then say, yeah, that kind of looks like it would work?
I think that's exactly what we're in the process of doing, Brisa. We're this talk is meant to be more of a educational talk, you know, just sharing information. But we have a whole team working in this room that's drawing away, and we'll be showing you some detailed concepts today. And I would say most specific to your question, perhaps tomorrow, when we'll be talking about areas of how to park, where to park, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, sounds like I got ahead. Thank you.
Vinayak, I'm getting a series of questions. I'll just read them and let you respond. A lovely presentation. Love the idea of having a big sign saying Montebello off the 60 freeway. Love the statement of having two beautiful buildings next to each other being great architecture, but two beautifuls across each other, and how that's urbanism. The opportunities to activate the space in between those two buildings. We have a wonderful city with a lot of history, and we can build on that history. So these are a series of comments. I'm not seeing question there.
No, we don't need questions. These are good comments.
Yeah, I think about the Angry Horse Brewery and Boulevard Market occupying that idea. That's Bonnie Santos.
Okay.
I have a comment. Kaiser?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just want to thank you for emphasizing the importance of design. You know, I'm a big advocate of a design, and it's so hard to implement that in projects sitting on the commission when we don't have the regulations for that. And so, you know, all I can do is suggest, and, you know, your comment about convincing the public is so crucial, because I've been an advocate for design guidelines for an extremely long time, and it's not until now that I've got appointed a commission that I can, you know, preach that. And I'm glad you're preaching that, and how important it is to educate our community about the importance of design, public art, and how we should be regulating that. You know, when you mentioned the blank wall, and the architect we couldn't stop the architect from doing that blank wall that happened not too long ago to us in downtown. And it was like a masonry wall, brick. It was just so beautiful. And it just stuccoed over it and it's blank. And there's nothing that I could have done about it but suggest because it's not regulated. And it was already said and done. So emphasizing that to our community. And I agree with all the comments you're making, new urbanism, especially in downtown, because a lot of people in our community don't know about that. And we did have for a long time, our city has been so stagnant and not accepting to these ideas that you're preaching. And I know this is something you were taught in school. I was taught in school. You too, Kaiser, because this is what we learned. But when we try to bring it up to other people, it's just so hard. To me, it's so hard to convince.
Well, thank you, Marlene. There's a book that I encourage all of you to read. It's a book written by a non-architect, which is what makes it so valuable, because we can all say architects and designers are always biased about such things. So this is a book written by a non-architect, and I like this book a lot. It's one of my favorite books. It's called Happy City. And it's a book written by a Canadian journalist called Charles Montgomery. And basically what he does is he argues brilliantly through this book that everything Marlene spoke about just now, the importance of design, the importance of sidewalks, making the kind of places that Marlene and I are talking about here, is not just a design project, it's a happiness project. He goes and talks to happiness psychologists, he talks to doctors, physicians, and he makes empirical studies that show how the kind of places we design have such a crucial effect, not just on our physical well-being, but on our psychological well-being. So Happy City is a book that says city making is not just a project, it's actually a health project, a happiness project that matters for all of us. And it includes everything we're talking about, right from trees to sidewalks, to cars, to buildings, to people, everything. So to go from, well, is there any other comment, or I just go into some projects?
There is a comment and a question, Vinayak. I strongly suggest more art. I think that recruiting professional artists as well as local student artists will bring inclusivity and equity in our community. Great work. And the question from Bonnie is, how does the city build stakeholder buy-in when it comes to design standards regarding art development, architecture, and small business that are already here? How do you get older realtors, property owners, and investors to align with the new vision?
Okay, I think I can answer that through this project that I'm going to show you, because we had the same questions here.
There is another
else?
question, just do you think the city's old downtown Video Boulevard can be narrowed to automobile traffic in order to create a more pedestrian-friendly area? Or is it important as a vehicle corridor?
Well, if you wait for another 3 or 4 hours, by the time it's 6 o'clock today, you will have the answer from our landscape architect and our traffic consultant. So they are working on that right now. They're hard at work. So, and this is important because it's easy for me to say, of course we should do it. But what they're going to do is they're studying it and they'll give you a very clearer answer than I would right now.
I think that's it in terms of comments and questions.
Okay, well, let's proceed into the project. So I wanted to show you projects because these are projects, I've been involved in on behalf of Mullen Polizoides. We've done this with my colleagues, but mainly to tell you that all the principles that we spoke about are not jargon. They're not theory. This is practical science. And I'm showing these projects because they've been built, that they are successful. Which is why I'm showing them to you. If they were not successful, I would not show them to you. And I'm saying this with a smile on my face and a clean heart because I cannot claim credit for this success. As designers, we do our part. As planners and our urban designers, we do our part. But the city plays its role. The citizens play their role. The stakeholders play their role. So placemaking is a collaborative process. I want you to understand this. It's wrong to say that designers create great places. That's the biggest mistake. Designers do their part in creating great places. but we need the backing of the community to understand the benefits of it. We need the municipality to follow through. So it's a constant partnership. So great places are as much about municipal vision as it is about designers enabling them, as it is about citizens supporting the idea. Without these three, you cannot have a great place. So this is a nationally known success story that our landscape architect, Dave Schneider, and us did together about more than 10 years ago now in a modest city, Lancaster, which is now well known because of this place. But when we went there in 2010, it was 2010, it was a place that looked like this. You know, this was the downtown. This was the main street. The photographs that you see to the top are what the historic main street in the 1920s would look like. Okay, that's the same street in the 1920s. Look how active it was, how charming it was. And then with Euclidean planning, all of these buildings went away. The street got widened. It got 5 lanes of traffic, 100-foot right of way from building to building. And it looked like a disinvested street. It looked like a COVID-19 street under lockdown. I mean, look at that, right? There was nobody there in 2010. So what this city entrusted us to do is it had received a national grant to invest in the downtown, and they had some budget, and they said, you know, what if I must give credit to the city here. It was their vision. They said, you know, what if we invested in revitalizing our main street? So they had already created a specific plan for the downtown, and one of the catalytic projects in the specific plan was Lancaster Boulevard. Now, what we found interesting is before we even came in as the designers, there were, you know, this is 8 blocks long, and it's two-thirds of a mile long. So you can imagine how many businesses were there on this project, right? So how could you ever do a project like this without the consent of all the businesses? So the first thing that the city did, which is an enormous credit to their, you know, they deserve all the credit for this, is they launched a wonderful outreach campaign. And they brought all these people together and they showed them the promise of what this could be. And they had workshops, and, you know, just like what we're doing here, they educated the community of why investing in the downtown would really be wonderful for them. And as part of this workshop, we came up with some graphics, which is what I'm going to show you. So we said, look, here's the way the street looks now. What we'd like to do is, because there's a street grid all around you, right? When you have a street grid, cars can flow in multiple ways in various directions. Cars have choices. If there's an accident on one street, they can take another street. So when you have a grid of streets like you have, it's possible to take 1 or 2 streets and slow them down really, where a driver says, oh my God, I can't drive here. That's exactly what a driver needs to say, because you can drive comfortably on other streets. But when you come to certain streets, you need to slow down to such a degree that you need to appreciate the buildings, or, you know, be such a pedestrian dominated place that cars don't drive very fast there. In order to do this, here's what we did. We took the 100-foot right of way. We kept the buildings and we kept the curbs. The sidewalks were only 10 feet wide, but we kept them because breaking the sidewalks is very expensive. We kept the parking on both sides of the street. We kept 1 lane of traffic on both sides of the street, but we took the central 3 lanes and we paved them with pervious paving so that the water now could go into the ground. So immediately the street becomes more porous, immediately generates a sustainability strategy that you're not now taking all the storm water and throwing it out. The water is going in. And instead of leaving this central zone just as a vacant pedestrian zone, we actually said, look, this downtown needs parking anyway. So why not actually put angled parking there? We put some lighting, okay? Because it's such a hot place, we planted trees, a double row of trees. So you now park under the trees. But the beautiful thing is you can just as easily take these cars away, and on the Thursday, it could become a happy farmer's market or whatever you want to do. This is the vision we generated. These are the drawings we generated at the workshop. You know, the community took its time. They understood the merits of this. One of the advantages we had in Lancaster is many of the businesses on the street had been there for multiple generations. So they actually had images of the old main street. So they realized that revitalizing the street would be fantastic because they didn't like the street that was in front of them. And the result was actually quite amazing. So we finished this work in about 6 or 8 months. We dropped our pencils. And then the city, to its credit, took the construction documents and implemented this project in 8 months. all of the workforce was actually from the city itself. So it generated enormous employment during the economic downturn. And you can see within 8 months, in increments of 3 blocks, 2 blocks, and 3 blocks, the entire Lancaster Boulevard was completely transformed. This is a photograph from circa 2011. So the trees are, as you can see, much younger, but you can see the farmers market going on Thursday and how busy it was at that time. Now, here's the best part of the story. What did this transformation do for the city? Number one, it gave them a place to be very proud of. Everyone came to hang out in this place. This became the heart of the downtown. It was a revitalized downtown. So the slide on the top is the Christmas parade, which they had not had in a long time. This was now being held on Lancaster Boulevard. The one at the bottom is the Thursday farmers market that happens, I don't know what they're doing now, but at least used to happen every Thursday. So far, so good, right? This is a brilliant social strategy that the city had generated, where everyone could now feel proud that they had a place in the city they could call their own. They could hang out there the way they want. The street had become a plaza. It had just become a beautiful thing. But there was an even more interesting economic result that came out of this, which is that within 3 years of completing the street, this street became so beautiful, so iconic, that developers wanted to build housing on this street. And the land values went up, all the businesses, stayed. You can see the businesses have not gone away, but infill on vacant parcels began to come in, including restaurants, a new museum next to the cultural center, et cetera, et cetera. And the result was the city invested, I think, close to about $14 million, and they got back $300 million or $280 million of economic development investment in as less as 3 years. I mean, you can check the stats in one of the reports. It's very well known, and this project went on to win the National Award for Smart Growth in 2010. It won the American Planning Association Award for Excellence in Planning Implementation. And all of a sudden, a simple investment in a street through design, through stakeholder support, through municipal vision, had created something so iconic that it not only shot the city to national attention, but it also brought back economic prosperity during the economic downturn. So the point here is investing in your streets is not about making your city beautiful. That's the last thing on the list. It's about making your city much more than that. It's about making your city sustainable, socially, economically, and environmentally at the same time. So this is very important. So the act of design in making streets, plazas, landscape is a lot more than aesthetic augmentation. That's the main point that I wish to make through this project. Now, here is a very comparable project that Kaiser and I did. We did this, like four years ago now, Kaiser, 3-4 years ago. This is in the city of Montclair.
Ongoing.
Many of you, yeah, ongoing too. Montclair, as you know, is also a post-war suburb, very similar to yours. So you can see the light brown is all the neighborhoods. You can see that the green and the red buildings are all the schools, just like you have. And you can also see that, like the diagrams we showed you yesterday, the dark brown that is drawn in absolute detail here after the charrette. We didn't draw this at the charrette, but eventually you will also get a drawing like this after the charrette, where we will actually take all the brown that I showed you yesterday, where new development can happen, and actually show you in what form it could possibly happen. This is not saying it has to happen this way, but this is a very clear picture that tells any community member very viscerally, what is the scale of development that can happen in your downtown. Now, note that there is also a robust green network, just like we showed you yesterday, along with the schools, etc. This is the concept that not unlike what we showed you yesterday as well. But the thing we are trying to do for you, and the thing we did in Montclair as well, is to create a very diverse typological armature of open space. So principal streets, secondary streets, the creeks, the small streets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a menu and an index of all these that's presented with pictures. These are the kind of things we're going to do for you as well in the final report that Kaiser will prepare. And the question then is, while these become all the ingredients that we give you, Now it is time to implement some of them. So Montclair is in the process of implementing some of its projects. Here is one of them that we're designing for them. This is a massive avenue, east-west avenue through the city called Arrow Highway. You have streets like this as well. And what we are doing with our landscape architect, Dave Schneider, he's doing this with us, is this is what the street looks like today, and this is what the street is going to become when they build it. So we've done construction documents for this, and the city is going to implement this soon, but you can see the difference, right? I mean, this is an unsustainable, toxic landscape filled with heat island, asphalt, et cetera, meant only for cars to go through. And here is an environment which is verdant, where pedestrians can feel happy, where cars are given their place, et cetera, But this is one kind of street. This street is more like an industrial corridor in the city. It's a commercial corridor. It doesn't have much development on it. So it's a green seam, taking traffic from one edge to the other. But there are other kinds of streets that are completely empty and disinvested. Look at it, a lot of vacant land, looking, beautiful views of the mountains. And through infill, we are actually talking about making those streets like this. So the point is that placemaking is about creating diverse places just through ingredients like trees and sidewalks and streets. So if you think of this versus this, you all of a sudden have two completely different places now. These are the kind of things we will be talking about over the next few days. I talked a lot about transit stations yesterday, and I want to show you a project here because there were some questions about it. This is South Pasadena. This is the Mission Station. It's a Gold Line station right here, which is the same thing you're getting in the next 10 years. And this is a specific plan we did for the downtown with Kaiser, where this is a drawing that shows you how the idea of sort of very deliberate design next to a station creates an enduring place where hundreds of people can now enjoy. So here's the station. We know that a lot of people are going to get down here. So instead of making this a crummy place, what you do is you now emerge from the station into a plaza. There are housing projects around it. This is the main street of the city. So the moment you arrive, you know the main street is right there. The monuments of the city are preserved. There's some monuments here which we have to keep. The farmers market happens here. The point is that the train, somebody was asking the question that trains divide the city yesterday. I hope you can see that in this case, the train does not divide the city. In fact, the train is nothing but a tiny little element going through, almost like a bus going through a road, right? You cannot do this with a Metrolink, mind you, because a Metrolink is a much more robust train, but you can certainly do it with a Gold Line. So the advantage of thinking of a Gold Line as a not very harmful element in the urban landscape, which can pass through plazas, pass through roads, with proximate places that are beautiful and that relate to it, is something we should really chase, because it's a fantastic opportunity for the city that is coming over the next decade. And finally, I just want to end with potential placemaking projects that are very relevant to some of the sites way up north at the 60 freeway. We told you there were a couple of parcels there which currently have these gigantic buildings. They are performing, they're not performing, whatever they are. But they exemplify a kind of urbanism where large buildings are surrounded by seas of cars. And this is a project in Montclair where we took the mega mall that exists in the middle of Montclair. We created a strategy where that entire site could be infilled and converted into a place that is as beautiful as this. This is an entire district where housing, office, living, streets can all happen. And it's very applicable to you because you also have sites like this that look over the freeway. So what are we trying to do here? We're taking the areas that face the freeway and largely give it to office buildings, you can see, with parking structures, etc., because it's not very good to live next to a freeway. But the inner half of the site that faces single family neighborhoods, not unlike your sites also, is given to mixed use development that is pedestrian friendly. So there are numerous ways of thinking of places. This is a very clear science. We now, after 3 decades of working in these projects, know empirically what to decide and what not to decide. The question is, do we have the choice? Do we have the vision? And do we have the impetus to make this happen? So I will leave it at that. And I would love to hear some comments and questions in the second half.
Vinayak, there are some comments while questions come in. I'll read them to you. Do you think the city's old downtown Video Boulevard can be narrowed to automobile traffic in order to create a more pedestrian-friendly area, or is it important as a vehicle corridor and create something similar to Lancaster? I responded quickly by suggesting, thanks for the question. We're studying this point right now. Should have an answer this evening. Please join us this evening. Additional comments. I simply love this idea. I wonder why there are only 14 participants, and I think they're referring to the people who have logged on this seminar, this presentation. There should be at least 144. Please help us get more people to the evening meeting. Additional comments, breathtaking transformation. Yes, I will. Yes, we have the vision to make this happen. I'm willing to advocate all of this. This is from Commissioner Ramirez. So a lot of positive feedback, Vinayak.
That's wonderful. Very good. I mean, I just want to emphasize that the reason I'm showing you these projects is because, they've been done by cities just like yours. There's nothing special or not special about them. They're just cities like yours who have taken the charge and enabled it. And it's the same people who have worked with them. I mean, these are projects that Kaiser, Dave, Tim, and I have done together. So
can I add, Vinayak, to your incredible list? This is just awesome list. And I wanna implore the people that are on this presentation. I think the one key ingredient that goes without saying is the community, is the leadership, is people that are participating in the process, the people that are not participating in the process that we are all planning for. None of this would be possible without you. We are at a very critical point in the visioning workshop. Today is Tuesday. Based on the direction we received yesterday, as Vinayak mentioned, we have a lot of people here sketching away and studying different compositions and different items, and we'll be presenting those to you this evening. So it's a very important point, and we want to make sure we have feedback from you, the community. So please, if you are a community member logged on, I implore you to knock on your neighbors' doors, your family members, get them to participate, get them to provide us feedback. If you're a business owner in the downtown, get them excited. If you are a city agency, I know folks from planning have logged on. Please help us get city staff involved so that we get their feedback, their comments, their concerns addressed during these 3 days. If you are a planning commissioner, please get us other planning commissioners involved, because again, these things, if there are concerns, items that we need to consider, we can do that in the 3 days we are there. From what we gathered yesterday, you want us to push further, and I think we are doing that. We're thinking big today. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we're considering some transformation items that we need your feedback. That is incredibly critical. We need to hear from more from the city staff as well as the entire community. So this evening is going to be an important presentation. We'd love to get comments and feedback from you this evening. You have some more comments coming in chat. What do we need to do as residents to bring this dream about? Do we need to talk to council? Yes, will yesterday's workshop be available to view online? I really wanted to see that one. I'll answer that quickly. We have recorded it, and these presentations will be posted on YouTube and will hopefully be made available if not by the end of this week, sooner. All of the presentations will be available both in video format as well as the PowerPoint presentation. So you can download some of the information and look at it carefully. I think as long as we ensure that the goal line is not an elevated current platform, but instead that it is built at ground level, that will avoid what I call splitting the city. That's a comment. I will continue to share the workshop with our businesses and our constant contacts. We need as much feedback as we can get, sharing with our neighbors, great information on transforming our city. What is the name of this dream? I'll let you answer that, Vinayak.
What is the name of this dream? I'm sorry, can you say that again? Can you ask the question again?
It just says, what is the name of this dream? And perhaps the person who's made the comment can maybe help us understand a little more.
No, I think that's a great question.
Okay,
I think,
well, you understand it. Please answer.
Hi, my name is Sochi, and I have been a resident of Montebello for about 25 years or a little more than that. And so I also work for the district. I'm a teacher. And so this is a wonderful dream. And I'm very want to know what is the name of this dream, so that when I speak to my colleagues, when I speak to my neighbors, my friends, what am I pushing forward? What is the name of this dream? That's my question.
I don't think any of us should be answering that. The only people who can answer it is the people whose dream it is. It should be your dream. We are only going to enable that dream. But we should talk about this. That's a fantastic question.
Should it be called the transformation of Montebello? Just a suggestion.
Okay.
We should keep bringing up this question every day for the next couple of days. Okay, that's a very good question.
And Bonnie's she makes an interesting point about branding a campaign for revitalization.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hello, this is Jessica Serrano with the City of Montebello. Just to attempt to respond to that, there isn't necessarily a name for this revitalization plan other than what we've attached to it now, which is Plan Montebello. Plan Montebello is the general plan update, and all of this redesigning and this visioning is part of that effort that the city council approved. And so there isn't necessarily a name for this revitalization effort specifically, but the overarching effort is Plan Montebello.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more comments or any, there's one more. Since Montebello just had its 100th birthday, maybe Montebello the next century. I think this is a suggestion on naming the vision. Thank you for that comment. Anybody, Joseph, anything from your end? If it's okay, we'll end this presentation.
Yes, I think that's fine. I think we had some great participation, and again, we will internally encourage our staff here to participate going forward. It's very important, as you mentioned, Kaiser, and please share this information with everyone you know, everyone that's involved now, and continue to follow us at www.planmontebello.com, where all of the latest information will be uploaded, including these presentations. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. See you later this evening.
Bye-bye.